In a world that celebrates kindness as the highest virtue, here's a truth that will disturb your moral foundations. Your kindness might be the very thing destroying your life, your relationships, and your potential. Not because kindness itself is wrong, but because what you call kindness has become a sophisticated form of self-betrayal that leaves you vulnerable, resentful, and powerless in a world that doesn't reward weakness. Niccolò Machiavelli, writing in 16th century Florence, understood something about human nature that modern society desperately wants to ignore. He observed that while everyone praises kindness in theory, in practice, those who are excessively kind often find themselves exploited, overlooked, and ultimately despised by the very people they seek to help. This isn't cynicism, it's a recognition of psychological realities that neuroscience has now validated with startling precision. Before we explore this uncomfortable territory together, I invite you to subscribe to this journey of honest self-examination. Because understanding the shadow side of virtue requires courage, and courage is always easier to maintain when you know you're not walking the path alone. The human brain contains what researchers call mirror neurons, specialized cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action. This neural mechanism forms the biological basis of empathy and compassion. But here's what most people don't realize. These same mirror neurons that enable kindness can become hijacked by psychological patterns that transform genuine compassion into something far more destructive. Dr. Robert Cialdini's groundbreaking research on social psychology reveals that what we often call kindness is actually a complex web of behaviors designed to avoid conflict, gain approval, and maintain a positive self-image. This pseudo-kindness isn't driven by genuine care for others but by our own psychological needs for safety and acceptance. And therein lies the trap that ensnares millions of well-intentioned people. Consider the modern epidemic of what psychologists term pathological altruism, helping behaviors that appear virtuous on the surface but ultimately harm both the giver and receiver. The parent who constantly rescues their adult child from consequences, creating a dependent personality incapable of growth. The employee who always says yes to additional work, breeding resentment and burnout. The friend who never expresses their true feelings, allowing toxic dynamics to fester unchecked. Machiavelli observed that men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few really know what you are. In other words, people respond not to your actual kindness but to how your kindness appears to them. And paradoxically, excessive kindness often appears as weakness, desperation, or manipulation, even when your intentions are pure. The ancient Stoics understood this paradox intimately. Marcus Aurelius, arguably one of history's most genuinely kind individuals, wrote extensively about the difference between wisdom-guided compassion and emotional reactivity masquerading as virtue. True kindness, he argued, sometimes requires saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing others to face the natural consequences of their actions. Modern neuroscience has revealed why excessive kindness weakens you at the most fundamental level. When you consistently override your own needs, desires, and boundaries to accommodate others, you activate what researchers call the stress response system. Your brain interprets self-neglect as a form of ongoing threat, flooding your system with cortisol and other stress hormones that literally rewire your neural pathways toward anxiety, depression, and learned helplessness. But the damage goes deeper than individual psychology. Excessive kindness disrupts the natural balance of relationships, creating what game theorists call asymmetrical exchanges. When you give without receiving, help without being helped, and accommodate without being accommodated, you inadvertently train others to view you as a resource rather than a person. This isn't their moral failing, It's a predictable psychological response to imbalanced dynamics. The most tragic aspect of misguided kindness is how it ultimately serves no one. The person you're trying to help doesn't develop their own strength and capabilities. You become depleted, resentful, and less capable of genuine assistance. And the relationship itself becomes built on an unstable foundation that breeds contempt rather than respect. To understand why excessive kindness weakens you, we must first examine what happens in your brain when you consistently violate your own boundaries. Neuroscientist Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's research reveals that your brain constructs your sense of self through what she calls predictive processing, constantly generating models of who you are based on your patterns of behavior. When you repeatedly act against your own interests, ignore your own needs, and prioritize others' comfort over your own well-being, you're literally training your brain to predict that you are someone who doesn't matter. This isn't philosophical. It's neurobiological. Your brain begins to encode a self-concept of worthlessness at the cellular level, creating neural pathways that automatically generate thoughts, feelings, and behaviors consistent with being less important than everyone else. The research on learned helplessness, pioneered by psychologist Martin Seligman, demonstrates how creatures develop depression and anxiety when they repeatedly experience situations where their actions don't matter. When your kindness consistently leads to being taken for granted, manipulated, or ignored, you're creating the exact conditions that breed psychological helplessness in your own life. But perhaps more disturbing is what happens in the brains of those who benefit from your excessive kindness. Functional MRI studies show that when people receive help they haven't earned or asked for, the areas of their brain associated with gratitude and reciprocity show decreased activation over time. In essence, unearned kindness literally rewires the recipient's brain to expect and demand more while feeling less grateful. You're not helping them, you're enabling their worst impulses while destroying your own psychological well-being. Machiavelli understood this dynamic centuries before we had the technology to measure it. He wrote, "Benefits should be conferred gradually, so that they may be better enjoyed." What he was describing is the psychological principle that people value what costs them something and devalue what comes too easily. When your kindness requires no effort, reciprocity, or appreciation from others, it becomes psychologically worthless to them. This brings us to what I call the respect paradox, a counterintuitive truth that challenges everything you've been taught about human relationships. Research consistently shows that people respect those who have boundaries more than those who don't, even when the boundaries occasionally inconvenience them. This isn't because humans are inherently cruel, but because boundaries signal self-respect, and self-respect is a prerequisite for earning respect from others. Dr. Henry Cloud's extensive research on boundaries reveals that the most successful, healthy, and genuinely helpful people all share one crucial characteristic. They have clear limits on what they will and won't do, and they maintain these limits consistently regardless of emotional pressure from others. These boundaries aren't walls meant to keep people out. They're frameworks that create healthy, sustainable relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The psychological mechanism behind this is fascinating. When you have clear boundaries, others are forced to engage with you as a complete person rather than simply a source of whatever they need. They must consider your feelings, respect your time, and offer something in return for your assistance. This creates what psychologists call reciprocal relationships, connections based on mutual value rather than one-sided giving. But here's where it gets truly interesting. People with strong boundaries are actually more helpful, not less. Because they preserve their resources, maintain their emotional well-being, and choose their battles carefully, they can offer assistance from a place of strength rather than depletion. Their help is more effective because it comes from genuine capability rather than desperate people-pleasing. Machiavelli observed that it is much more secure to be feared than to be loved. While this sounds harsh, modern psychology has revealed the wisdom in this statement. He wasn't advocating cruelty, but recognizing that respect, which he called fear, is a more stable foundation for relationships than conditional approval, which he called love. When your relationships are built on others' need for your approval, they can withdraw that approval at any time. When they're built on respect for your boundaries and capabilities, the foundation is much more solid. This is why successful leaders, effective parents, and healthy individuals all share certain characteristics that might seem unkind to those addicted to pathological altruism. They say no when necessary. They allow others to face consequences. They express disagreement when they feel it. They prioritize their own well-being enough to remain capable of helping others effectively. The research is clear. People who can't say no become less trustworthy over time, not more. Others begin to doubt their sincerity, question their motives, and eventually lose respect for someone who seems to have no respect for themselves. Your excessive kindness sends a signal that you don't value your own time, energy, or needs, and others unconsciously begin to mirror that evaluation. The third way excessive kindness weakens you involves what I call the manipulation trap, a psychological dynamic where your desire to be kind makes you the perfect target for those who would exploit your good intentions. This isn't just about obvious predators who deliberately seek out kind people to victimize. It's about how your inability to say no, set boundaries, or prioritize your own needs creates a psychological profile that unconsciously attracts problematic relationships. Dr. George Simon, a leading researcher on manipulation tactics, has identified that manipulators have an almost supernatural ability to identify what he calls overly conscientious individuals, people whose desire to be good, helpful, and kind overrides their ability to recognize when they're being exploited. These individuals become what Simon terms preferred targets because their psychological makeup makes them predictably exploitable. The process works through what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. The manipulator provides occasional appreciation, affection, or approval, just enough to keep you invested, while consistently taking more than they give. Your kindness becomes the hook that keeps you trapped in increasingly unbalanced relationships, because you keep hoping that if you just give a little more, care a little harder, the other person will finally reciprocate appropriately. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few really know what you are, and those few dare not oppose the opinion of the many." In modern terms, this means that your reputation for kindness can become a prison that prevents you from acting in your own best interests. Others expect you to always be accommodating, always put their needs first, always sacrifice for the greater good, even when that sacrifice serves no one's genuine interests. But here's where Machiavelli's insights become truly profound. He understood that strategic compassion, kindness guided by wisdom rather than emotional reactivity, is far more effective than indiscriminate niceness. Strategic compassion involves helping others in ways that actually help them, rather than simply making you feel like a good person. It means sometimes saying no to immediate requests in service of longer-term well-being. Consider the difference between these two approaches. The excessively kind person gives money to their addicted relative every time they ask, enabling the addiction while feeling virtuous about their generosity. The strategically compassionate person refuses to give money but offers to pay for treatment, drive them to meetings, or provide other forms of support that address the actual problem rather than just the immediate crisis. One approach feels kind but perpetuates suffering. The other might seem harsh in the moment but serves the person's genuine well-being. This is what Machiavelli meant when he wrote that sometimes you must learn to be able not to be good. Not because goodness is wrong, but because mindless niceness often prevents actual goodness from occurring. The neuroscience behind strategic compassion reveals why this approach is more effective. When you help someone in a way that requires effort from them, activates their own problem-solving capabilities, and creates natural consequences for their choices, you're supporting the development of what researchers call self-efficacy, the brain's confidence in its own ability to handle challenges. Conversely, when you remove challenges, solve problems they should solve themselves, and shield them from natural consequences, you're literally weakening their neural pathways for resilience, problem-solving, and emotional regulation. Your kindness becomes a form of psychological injury that makes them less capable over time. Dr. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion versus self-pity reveals a similar dynamic within your own psychology. True self-compassion involves treating yourself with the same kindness you would show a good friend, which includes not allowing yourself to be exploited, maintaining your boundaries, and ensuring your own needs are met. Self-pity, masquerading as humility or selflessness, actually perpetuates suffering by refusing to take the actions necessary for genuine well-being. The manipulation trap is particularly insidious because it co-opts your highest values in service of destructive patterns. You tell yourself you're being loving when you enable dysfunction. You believe you're being humble when you're actually being self-neglecting. You think you're avoiding conflict when you're actually creating much larger conflicts down the road. Machiavelli's harsh truth is that the world contains people who will exploit your kindness without hesitation or gratitude. Not because they're evil, but because exploitation is often the path of least resistance, and humans naturally follow such paths unless there are clear boundaries preventing them from doing so. Your job isn't to make exploitation impossible. That would require becoming cynical and closed-hearted. Your job is to make exploitation unprofitable through clear boundaries and consistent consequences. The solution to the weakness that comes from excessive kindness isn't to become cruel or selfish, it's to develop what I call conscious kindness. This is compassion guided by wisdom, generosity tempered by boundaries, and care expressed through strength rather than weakness. It requires a fundamental shift from reactive people-pleasing to intentional relationship-building based on mutual respect and genuine care. The first principle of conscious kindness is learning to distinguish between helping and enabling. True help increases someone's capability, resilience, and self-sufficiency. Enabling decreases these qualities while creating dependency. Before offering assistance, ask yourself, will this help them become more capable of handling similar situations in the future, or will it make them more likely to need my help again? This distinction requires developing what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between different types of distress and respond appropriately to each. Sometimes people need comfort and support. Sometimes they need encouragement to face challenges they're avoiding. Sometimes they need clear boundaries that prevent them from using you as an escape from their own responsibilities. The second principle involves what I call strategic vulnerability. This means sharing your authentic thoughts, feelings, and needs appropriately rather than hiding behind a mask of endless accommodation. Research shows that relationships built on mutual vulnerability are stronger, more satisfying, and more resilient than those built on one-sided giving. Strategic vulnerability requires courage because it means risking disapproval from people who prefer you as a resource rather than a person. But it also creates the possibility of genuine connection with those who can appreciate your full humanity. Machiavelli understood that being loved for who you pretend to be is ultimately more isolating than being respected for who you actually are. The third principle is developing what I call outcome independence, the ability to act from your values regardless of others' reactions. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others' feelings, but rather accepting that you cannot control their responses to your boundaries, needs, or authentic self-expression. Your job is to be respectful and considerate. Their job is to manage their own reactions. Outcome independence is particularly crucial when dealing with people who have become accustomed to your unlimited availability and accommodation. When you begin setting boundaries and expressing your needs, they may respond with guilt trips, emotional manipulation, or accusations of selfishness. This is a predictable psychological response called extinction burst, a temporary increase in problematic behavior when established patterns are disrupted. Understanding this phenomenon helps you maintain your boundaries despite temporary discomfort. The people who truly care about you will adjust to your new boundaries and may even express appreciation for your increased authenticity. Those who cannot accept your full humanity were never genuine friends. They were consumers of your kindness who provided just enough positive reinforcement to keep you giving. The fourth principle involves developing what I call strategic generosity, choosing when, how, and to whom you offer help based on wisdom rather than emotional reactivity. This means considering whether your assistance will actually serve the person's long-term well-being, whether you have the emotional and practical resources to help effectively, and whether the relationship offers genuine reciprocity. Strategic generosity also means becoming comfortable with the discomfort that comes from not helping everyone who asks. Dr. Brené Brown's research reveals that people with strong boundaries experience initial guilt when they say no, but this guilt decreases over time as they see the positive effects of their boundaries on their relationships and well-being. The fifth and most important principle is what Machiavelli called virtue, not niceness or people-pleasing, but the strength to do what is genuinely right even when it's difficult. True virtue sometimes requires disappointing people in the short term to serve their long-term interests. It means being honest when honesty is uncomfortable, maintaining boundaries when others pressure you to abandon them, and prioritizing genuine well-being over superficial harmony. This kind of conscious kindness requires developing what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediately acting to eliminate them. When someone is disappointed by your boundary, when someone accuses you of being selfish for having needs, when someone tries to guilt you into abandoning your principles, you must be able to sit with the discomfort of their disapproval without automatically accommodating to make it go away. Research shows that people who can tolerate short-term disapproval in service of long-term relationship health create more satisfying, stable, and genuinely loving connections. They also maintain better mental health, achieve more of their goals, and ironically become more helpful to others because they preserve their own resources and capabilities. The transformation from excessive kindness to conscious kindness isn't easy, but it's essential for anyone who wants to create a life of genuine meaning and positive impact. It requires accepting that you cannot be loved by everyone, that some people will prefer you weak and accommodating, and that your highest responsibility is to be genuine rather than universally approved of. Machiavelli's harsh truth ultimately leads to a liberating realization. When you stop trying to be loved by everyone, you become capable of being genuinely loved by the people who matter. When you stop enabling others' worst impulses, you create space for their best qualities to emerge. When you stop abandoning yourself in service of others, you become someone worth knowing, respecting, and genuinely caring about. Remember, the goal isn't to become harsh or uncaring. It's to become consciously caring in ways that actually serve both yourself and others. This requires developing the wisdom to distinguish between genuine need and manipulation, the courage to maintain boundaries despite emotional pressure, and the strength to choose long-term well-being over short-term comfort. As we conclude this exploration of Machiavelli's harsh truth, Understand that recognizing the weakness in excessive kindness isn't an attack on compassion. It's a call to develop compassion sophisticated enough to actually help rather than simply making you feel virtuous. True kindness requires strength, wisdom, and the courage to do what's genuinely right rather than what's immediately popular. If this perspective challenges and inspires you, if you're ready to develop the kind of conscious kindness that creates genuine positive impact, subscribe to continue this journey of authentic growth. The world needs more people who are strong enough to be truly kind, wise enough to help effectively, and courageous enough to maintain boundaries that serve everyone's genuine well-being. Your kindness is not your weakness, but your unconscious kindness might be. The choice to transform it into conscious strength is yours alone.